everyone, my name is Helene and today I am back with my August wrap-up. I read 11 books in August and for that reason I'm not going to go too much into detail with each and every book. I'm just going to give you my thoughts on them and then move on. The very first book I finished is also a book I mentioned in my last wrap-up, and that is Far from the Madding Crowd by Thomas Hardy. I loved this book and I specifically loved the ending, so I actually ended up giving this book 5 stars. It is an epic love story about a woman and 3 men who fall in love with her, and then this woman has to make a decision as to whom she chooses. The ending is extraordinary and I just really love Thomas Hardy now, and I'm definitely going to read more by him. Bastard Out of Carolina by Dorothy Allison. Now this is a different kind of story because this is a modern classic about a main character called, I've forgotten what her name is, but this main character goes through a brutal childhood. And I cannot tell you too much, but it's one of those books that will make you depressed. And while I was reading it, I was wondering, why do I always end up reading these kinds of books? But I think it's because that even though they make me sad, they are important. They have an important message in them. And this one is no exception. I ended up giving this one 4 stars. I did give it 5 stars to begin with, but in the end it didn't feel like a 5-star book for me. Some parts of it were a little bit dragging, but all in all it was just such an interesting book and a brutal story, so it's one of those books that you must read at some point in your life. Another classic I read this month is The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn by Mark Twain. Now I'm sure a lot of you out there have either heard of this book or have read it. It is a very well-known classic, and I think that it's one of those classics that you read in school, at least in America. I just never read it, so here we go. I liked it. I think the adventures that Mark Twain takes Huckleberry Finn on are interesting, they are funny, and I especially liked how the main character comes across as being kind of naive. He describes things happening without knowing what that really means, and then it's up to the reader to understand what is really going on. And I like that about this book. But all in all, I did feel like it became too much about the adventures and meeting new characters all the time. So I ended up giving it 3 stars. I really liked it. I see why it's a classic and a well-loved children's classic, I think it is. So yeah, I'm glad I finally read it. Next we have The Hours by Michael Cunningham, which I'm pretty sure I read during the booktubeathon. This one is about Virginia Woolf and her life and her book called Mrs. Dalloway. It specifically deals with 3 women who all have something in common with Virginia Woolf. I cannot tell you what that is, but the interesting thing is that all 3 women live in different eras, so they don't know each other, and it's up to the reader to understand what is really going on. I thought that this was a beautiful piece of work. It has so many hints in it that you have to discover as a reader, and I think you have to know Virginia Woolf and you have to have read Mrs. Dalloway in order to fully appreciate this book. But I have done both and I really admired it. And yeah, I don't know what else to say. It was just a great read. I know of some people who didn't really like it, but I liked it, so I gave it 4 stars. Another classic I read this month is a classic I buddy read with a bunch of people, and that is The Tenant of Wildfell Hall by Anne Bronte, which comes in this beautiful Penguin English Library edition. I love it. This is about a main character called Helen. However, the interesting thing about this book is that it doesn't start out with Helen. It starts out with a man called Gilbert, I believe he's called, and he writes these letters to another man. But then gradually you realize how Helen becomes part of the picture, and halfway through the book you do get the story from Helen's point of view through diary entries. So I liked how this book was structured. It came with surprises. I started out trying to figure out where Helen was coming into the story, how she was part of it, and I like when the author puzzles the reader because it keeps me interested in the book. I really like this story. It is another love story. It is quite epic, I would say. and I ended up giving it 4 stars. Now, the reason why I didn't give it 5 stars is because I felt like some of the middle part was dragging for a little bit too long, and also I questioned the behavior of the main character, Gilbert, or one of the main characters. I questioned his behavior towards the end of the book. I didn't understand his decisions, but all in all, I really enjoyed this book, and I believe that a lot of the other booktubers really loved it as well. So definitely check out this book if you have any interest in it. Then we have a book that came out in Denmark on August the 17th, I believe it was, and that is Finding Audrey by Sophie Kinsella. This is a young adult book about a girl called Audrey, obviously, who suffers from social anxiety. So she stays at home all the time and she wears these sunglasses at all times because she cannot deal with the world. That means that this book mainly takes place at home, at Audrey's, with her family. And let me tell you something, this family is kind of crazy. Especially the mother left an impact on me because she was just exaggerated. Sometimes I found her character a little bit too exaggerated. I didn't understand the decisions she made, but I still found her funny, and I still found the rest of the family very interesting, some of the characters more than others. And this book was a fun read. It's not supposed to be fun because it is about this main character who suffers, but it was fun. I think that Sophie Kinsella aims at creating a fun story but with an important message. So yeah, I think she managed to do that. I ended up giving this one 3 stars because it didn't wow me in any way, but it was definitely an entertaining read. Now, this is the point where I might get a little bit unpopular here on BookTube because the next book is very loved by a lot of people, and that is Uprooted by Naomi Novik. This is a fantasy story, and there has been some speculation as to whether this is aimed for adults or young adults. I don't know, so I'm just going to talk about the story and my thoughts on it. This is a retelling of different fairy tales. I found some Beauty and the Beast, I found some Rapunzel in the story, but it also turns into its own story. My problem with this book was that I loved the very first 100 pages, and I said so in a video as well that I would have rated those 100 pages 5 stars. But things went downhill from there, unfortunately. When the story started becoming its own story, I started losing interest. I didn't care for the characters, and I didn't think that the story in itself was interesting enough. Once I get into that kind of mood where I'm just frustrated with everything, it's kind of hard to get out of again. So the last 100 pages I kind of skimmed. I just wanted for this to be over with. So my reading experience of this one was really bad, and in the end I gave it 2 stars because of the beginning, which was brilliant in my opinion, but then the rest of it was not that brilliant. Redeployment by Phil Clay. This is a book about the war in Iraq, and it is written by a man who participated in the war. So you could call it non-fiction, but it is written as a fictional piece of work. Nevertheless, it gives you a very rare insight into what it is like to be a soldier in this bloody war. And it's obviously going to be brutal and honest. I like that about it because I felt like, even though I have no idea about what it's like to be in a war, I understood where he was coming from. He was very good at describing what was going on and what he was feeling, so I like that about this book. Ultimately, I gave it 3.5 stars. Once again, it wasn't extraordinary, but it was still unique in its own way. It gave me something, it educated me in the war, and yeah, I enjoyed it. Then I received a gift, and that is The Idiot by Fyodor Dostoevsky, and obviously I had to pick it up immediately afterwards, so I did. This is another classic about the idiot who is the main character. He is called an idiot because he suffers from epilepsy, I think that's what it's called. He sometimes gets these fits which people don't like, and they call him an idiot. That's very brutal, I think, but that's how it was. So we follow this main character as he goes to Russia. In the very first chapter we actually meet him in a train. sitting together with 3 other men, and they discuss Russia and the situations they are in, etc. And then the story digresses from there. I like this book. I am now kind of a fan of Dostoevsky, and this is definitely not going to be my last read by him. I especially love how he becomes philosophical in some chapters. He starts thinking about life and what life means, and I found myself agreeing with a lot of things he was saying, so I like those chapters a lot. But I also like the main story, obviously. The only thing I didn't like was the fact that one of the important characters I didn't really connect with, and that's a shame because I wanted to connect with her, but you don't hear a lot about her, so I think that's the reason why. But all in all, I gave this book 4 stars, and I'm definitely going to pick up Crime and Punishment sometime in the future. It is on my TBR list. I have 2 more books to go. The next one is The Time Traveler's Wife by Audrey. This is another book that is very well loved here on BookTube, and it has really good ratings everywhere. But it's one of those books, once again, that I didn't really like. Let me tell you why. This is a book about a time traveler's wife, obviously. So of course you're going to get a lot of time traveling when reading this book, and I was expecting that. What I didn't like though was the fact that it was structured very jumbled, and I didn't understand what was going on. I didn't understand the rules behind the time traveling because you are thrown into the story without really getting any explanation. Now you do get an explanation gradually through the book, but not enough, in my opinion. After having finished the book, I'm still left with a bunch of questions, and I don't think that Audrey does a very good job at explaining this time traveling all in all, so that's a very big shame. I also had some problems with the writing style, which became very staccato-like and very repetitive in my opinion, but I did like some parts of the book. I did like the relationship between the 2 main characters. However, I also had some problems with that, because I didn't really understand how the wife dealt with this time traveling and living with it. I just didn't buy it. So yeah, I mean, there is one chapter in this book that I loved, and that is the chapter that takes place during Christmas, and I think that's because in this chapter you have absolutely no time traveling, or almost no time traveling. You do have a little bit, but I liked it because that one was straightforward and understandable, but the rest of the book was not for me, so I ended up giving this one 2 stars. I must be the only person in the universe who didn't like this book, but that's how it is. And the very last book I finished in August is a Danielle Steel book. This is Happy Birthday. I started reading books in English through Danielle Steel, and this was a book I had on my TBR list, so I decided to pick it up on a whim. Not that I'm a huge fan of Danielle Steel, but if you've read her books, you know what they are like. You know that they give you a relaxing read, they give you a sweet and bittersweet story, which comes with obstacles and journeys. I like to describe her books as being fairy tales because the characters go on a journey, they meet some obstacles, and it may or may not come with a happy ending. You never know, but yeah, I like this book. It left me with a smile on my face. It deals with 3 people who share the same birthday, and their lives entwine during the book. So it's a very simple story, and yeah, I gave it 3 stars. And that is it for my August wrap-up. I hope you enjoyed it. Have a great day, everyone, and thank you so much for watching. Happy reading. Bye bye.